Good morning, good evening, good day, greetings and salutations. And might I add, welcome to the Safe Room featuring Security Side Quest. How are you doing out there today? That was the question I wanted to take that dramatic pause for. My name is Tristan Watty, and thank you for joining today. If this is your first time, I am with the professional services of AWS, where I'm a senior security consultant that is charged with helping accelerate customers to the cloud in a secure manner. And today, I am joined by the mysterious, the legendary, and insert placement word there. How's it going today, Russ?
Hey, it's going good. Not bad for a Monday, if I can say the word Monday.
Yeah, right?
But yeah.
Monday. And what is your background, Russ?
So I am in the customer incident response team. So I help people navigate their incident response journeys, which is why I always end the show with create an incident response plan.
Yeah, see?
Like I'll do today again.
Tell the story starting at the ending. See, that's good storytelling right there. Right? Only few can get away with it, but you do it perfectly. But for those who are out there, feel free. Tell us where are you starting your journey from? Where are you dialing in from today? Where are you viewing? Where are you watching or listening to? And we already started to say, hey, Aman, nice to see you joining from India. And while those questions are rolling and being answered, the other question, and I'm going to pose this to you and then to chat, Russ, is what is your favorite dessert? This is a question that the people need answered.
They do. I'm going to go ahead and go with my all-time personal favorite, ice cream. I'm not really fancy in that regard. I think ice cream, they really just perfected it. I love each and every flavor. There's no specific flavor. I love ice cream. I like the super sugary ones. I like vanilla. I like it all, man.
Yeah.
Amazing. I could go on a whole an entire episode about ice cream.
I just want to see the Venn diagram. It's just like ice cream in the middle. That's all it is. And that's funny. See, this is the funny thing is I was trying to think of what my favorite dessert is, and I have layers, right? I have a layered defense of ice cream and other desserts I would also include in that. But it really depends on the mood. If I had to pick one, I would say strawberry shortcake. Nice, clean, efficient. But then it goes off the rails because I would just do a 7-layered cake as well, but I digress. The dichotomy of Tristan. But we also have a couple other people joining in and say hello. All these individuals joining in, having a good time. And we have Joseph from Kenya. Nice to see you. And feel free to put in your chat and continue on the conversation because we have a lot of fun to talk about today. But first, Russ, where did we come from?
Well, so a little recap on last week. We did our Castle's Secret Passages episode on advanced cloud security architecture. That's when we brought in our amazing guest James and went over some more advanced architecture, kind of bringing that startup into a more mature organization at the enterprise level.
Yeah.
I also do have to go back because we did make a mistake in an earlier episode that I feel like we needed to address. We were referring to favorite 90s cartoons, and I thought that because this show, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, started in the 80s, it wouldn't count. But it ran all the way into 96. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a little editor's note. Correction.
Well, asterisk.
Ninja Turtles. Absolutely.
See, it depends on which show, right? Because there's so many turtle shows. You could say the 90s movies, and then that includes the encompassment of it, right? So we'll leave the chat to decide, right? That would be should we include turtles in the 90s or the 80s? And I have a feeling we'll also gauge the age of our audience based on the answer too. But I digress on that because
opening a can of worms.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation for another day. But today, what we are going to speak about, what we're going to talk about, is a little bit of automation. I always do this wave to say automation because I feel like it deserves that. And today's episode, what we're going to dive into is some of the core concepts. And if you look at the title of the episode, might give some spoilers to around the theme, because last theme was the castle and kind of the securing. There's some Mario elements. Oh, and speaking of Mario, it's March 10th, so happy Mario Day to everybody out there. So if you get that reference, you played a lot of Mario or looked at a calendar. But the second piece is diving in to our today's theme, which is a little bit of the anime variety, a little bit along 90s cartoon, depending on how you look at it. It's also 80s controversy, but Dragon Ball Z, right? Where the concept behind that is different individuals powering up themselves. They're working out, they're training, they're doing all these things to reach goals and milestones that they haven't before. And I think that applies to automation, especially when you're looking at, all right, how can I improve my security posture? How can I go through the different maturity levels? And when you think of power levels, start to think of going from reactive to detective to preventative to proactive, because each one of these stages has a different trigger. When you think reactive, you're doing, let's say, from IR standpoint, manual investigations. Detective, automated alerted. Preventative, maybe automated guardrails. And then proactive, you start to get into, hey, I can predict this. All those concepts start to apply, as well as just starting to go through. We have a lot of people. So, Orlando, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. All these different areas. It's always fun. Yes, Dragonal, thank you. And we also have Sundar from Canada. So, going on that same line of thinking, if we're going through the automation, there's a lot of services that you can leverage. But there's some key services that we'll touch upon. And spoilers, there's Lambda in it. But Lambda, event bridge, step functions, right? All these good parts. And you also start to get into the building blocks. So Russ, when you think of the building blocks of automation, what is the service that you pick off the top of your head?
Ooh, probably Lambda, I think, would probably be the first thing.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing is Lambda seems to pop up a lot in people's memories because they're like, oh, I want to do automation, I want to do some scripting, I want to do something that takes a little bit of extra work. And for today, I think what we need to do is, we always say it's dangerous to go alone, so take this. You also have to follow a sage's path. But if we need to power up along with our theme, we need to go to our training sensei. And our training sensei for today is, we have a special guest that we're going to welcome to the stage today. And that is going to be Javier. How are you doing?
Yeah, Javier.
Hey, everyone. My name is Javier. I work with Russ on the customer incident response team. Huge advocate for security automations. How's everyone doing today? Tristan, Russ, how are we doing?
We're doing fine, because we started thinking about desserts. So that kicked us off on, a high up there. So you know what question is coming next?
Do you eat dessert? Or you just like a?
I mean, I'm a savory guy. So the answer is obvious here. Candied bacon. For those who know.
Ooh.
Candy bacon, yes, that is a good choice. I like to put that on. You ever try candy bacon on some mashed potatoes? Just saying, there's a little dichotomy there.
I can get behind that. Get behind that.
You gotta commit. That's the thing. It's just like, all right, it's bacon, so it goes on mashed potatoes, right? But if they're candy, twice the fun.
Yeah.
But I digress. So another food. So we have this theme. And we thought we would bring in our training sensei for today, you, Javier, as we're talking about automation. So what are some of the basics we need to do to start off?
Yeah. So the biggest thing here is really understanding your environment, right? What resources do you have? What do you want to protect? How do you want to protect it? Threat modeling is huge here, right? How can someone create some kind of unauthorized event in my environment, and how do I want to protect that, right? the key here is we want to try to be as quick with our response as possible. So programmatic responses, right? So that's the first thing I think about, Tristan, when it comes to security automations.
So programmatic, if I were to take this and say I'm just a novice here, so we would go to the command line to start off with, right? So we need to know the basics of our control or key control, depending on how you want to say it. So the CLI, I think that's one of the places to start off, right? If you're not familiar with it,
happy to jump into that if folks are interested. So there's a couple different ways that a user can interact with their AWS resources, right? You can, and which a lot of people do, interact directly in the console, clicking and setting your configurations. But that takes a lot of time, right? And in an active event, knowing, let me click here, let me go to this user to rotate this access key. Time is valuable here, right? Especially with the fact that an average dwell time is about 16 days before it's even noticed, right? That's a lot of time for someone to fully enumerate and be able to come up with a plan for what they may or may not want to do. So if we can think ahead of time, and that's kind of where I was getting at earlier with how do we want to train to prepare our environment for whatever comes our way, getting more comfortable with programmatic things, right? So you can directly interact with your AWS environment using the CLI, and we can jump into that a little later. But you can also use the software development kit, SDK. Again, we'll get into that later as well through a demo where with the CLI, you can interact directly, but with the SDK, you can use things like Lambda, configure your runtime code in that Lambda function, and when something happens, that Lambda function runs, it already has everything you already need, and it'll just respond and run quickly so that you are not so you are working with time as opposed to against time.
Yeah, I would say that's an important concept, especially when you start thinking of 16 days, right? That's like taking a long vacation somewhere, coming back and saying, hey, are we done yet? So is those couple of things. And I would throw it also to the chat is when you think of security automation and get into the programmatic aspect of just typing different things, what do you think your power level is when it comes to AWS security automation? Feel free to, I think, put that in the chat. I'm curious, the reactive, the proactive, preventative. Think of where your power level is. And also, still saying hola as well. And thank you from Saudi Arabia. So I don't know about you, Russ, but we first step is understanding, controlling our energy. And the second part, I think, would be once we control our energy is learning how to fly. I think that's the correlation of the steps. So I would pose this question to you, Russ, is when you're learning to fly, what do you think of from that aspect? What kind of monitoring do we start to go down, or what service I should say?
Yeah, when we start talking about monitoring and learning how to fly, we're definitely talking about CloudTrail. There's no other option that fits there. That is definitely the flying cloud in this situation.
Yeah, sure. The Nimbus. Yeah.
No pun intended.
Yeah, no pun intended. I heard it both ways. So, all right. So we start out flying in CloudTrail. We're going through. So Javier, what's the next step after that? What do you think from an automation standpoint?
So this is actually kind of jumping into what I love talking about is services that enable event-driven architectures. So services like EventBridge and Config, what they look for is they look for these events, and you can use that as a trigger, which talking a lot right now without showing anything. We'll show something later and put it all together. But we're looking for those events and for those identifiers, so to speak, so that when our infrastructure is running, it sees whatever event and it can have the configurations necessary and the code necessary to respond to that event in time.
Yeah. And I think that, to your point, is a very important part of the puzzle is in time. And the key part of that is how do you define time within your organization? And I think that goes back to your target state security strategy and kind of what is your RTO and a bunch of other strategies and governance policies and things of that nature. But I think one of the key points of automation is it's able to respond almost instantaneously, right, to these different items and these different aspects, and to be able to take action, especially as you start to grow within your organization or your environment. Because last week we were speaking about an individual started in the startups and was in charge with their cloud security posture, and then eventually it grew and grew, and then they were more of a mid-size, and then the different considerations they had to have. So I think automation is a key component of that. So CloudWatch, Lambda. So I think one of the areas that we mentioned and we kind of hinted upon a couple of times is we started off with our basic energy training. We're flying. So the next thing we have to do, because it's kind of mandatory, especially within animation, is the power up. What would be the power up feature? How will we do that?
I'm pretty biased here. I would stick with Event Bridge, right? Event Bridge is how we can set ourselves up for success here, because logging happens in the background, right? Unless we have something that's looking out for certain logs, those logs are just going to sit.
Yeah.
So being able to know your environment and know what to look for in events that you want to protect yourself against is really, right? That's kind of why I started a little bit more abstract, right? That's the bread and butter here. Knowing what you want to protect and how you can protect it is going to help, because then you can make that programmatic, right? Because that's repeatable.
Yeah, and it's definitely that. And some of the comments in chat were mentioning CloudWatch, EventBridge, Security Hub. That's kind of a trifecta right there. And your favorite one is in the middle, like an ice cream sandwich.
There we go.
Or we start to think about it. We also say hi and hello and thank you for joining all these people from all these lovely places. But somebody also said WAF, Lambda, CloudFormation. So it's an interesting kind of dichotomy we have here. Some people are leading more on the monitoring, CloudWatch, EventBridge, Security Hub. Some are leading on the action side of the house of the WAF, Lambda, CloudFormation. So find that a little bit interesting. So Russ, which path would you take to go through?
That's a tough one, right? We keep discussing how everything's very contextual, but that's a bit of a cop-out. So I'm going to go with the monitoring route. I don't think that you can protect or respond to something that you don't know is occurring. So I think the monitoring, for me, is up there with the most important one. But I would like to hear from the audience to see, what is your biggest security battle? What are you guys facing? Some of the key challenges, that people face in automating their cloud security. For sure. And while we're waiting on that, just like to do the whole streamer thing where, I'm like and subscribe. And but seriously, if you like our content and the information we're providing, then feel free to like and subscribe and check us out every Monday.
Yeah. Follow us on LinkedIn. Ping us your stories. Tell us what your favorite battle was, right? That you overcame when it came to leveraging automation, especially if you came over with a nifty script. I think everybody from the audience would like to hear about it, right? So feel free to reach out on the pages, on the community page, and all those other places. So a couple of areas that I think of off the top of my head is, like what Javier was saying, is instant response time. How long does it take for, one, somebody to be notified, two, somebody to address, and three, to something to get remediated? All those pieces of the puzzle come into play in some manner or form. And usually what happens is how do we fix this? How do we get better? And that's usually the conversation that is had. And I think one of the key places we can start to think about how we get better is diving into a certain thing we call, I think, a side quest, right? So with that being said, let me change my voice into the announcer voice. Yeah, that's my best one. But as SideQuest legend has it, we will dive into another security side quest where we will start to think about, we will start to understand, hey, what steps do we have to take in order to, I guess, understand from a customer viewpoint? And as I get the SideQuest board up and running, hey, I pose this to Javier off the bat with the context of only a company being overwhelmed by security threats. What's the biggest security energy drain for them? How would you handle that?
Oof. I think I'm a little biased right now, based on my previous caseload. Managing tech debt. That's been a big issue I've been seeing. Deprovisioning unused IAM users or access keys, cloud formation templates from demo stacks or tools or SaaS tools that are deployed through cloud formation that are no longer used. I think that's been the biggest security challenge that I've seen within the past couple weeks.
So
that's a great one.
Yeah, tech debt. The little thing that, nobody has to deal with at all, right? Of course not. And I would like to hear from the audience as well. What is your biggest concern when it comes to being overwhelmed by security threats? Maybe having some tech debt. The biggest drain of energy. Feel free, put it in the chat. But for now, what we will do is we will dive into a side quest. And as soon as the side quest shows up, because you love live streaming and items don't show up. But there we go. And there we go again. So I will dive back out because for some reason it's not popping up properly. But I think the story for today that we will tell, instead of going with the board, we will start to head into understanding if we had an individual that was tasked with trying to figure out within their environment, where do I begin with the automation? Because I have all of these different users trying to get into my environment that won't be unauthenticated, or will be authenticated, or won't be unauthenticated. You see how it starts to get confusing because, okay, is this person a user or are they not a user? Or are they a user that's authenticated, but they don't have access to be where they're trying to go? So I think the easiest way to do this is let's start to think about the path and start to think about how, from a SideQuest perspective, they can go about this. Well, I think the first part is to start with this right here, CloudTrail. And I hold it up here to the screen because CloudTrail is an important part of the puzzle that often solves a lot of the pieces of what's going on within the environment, especially when you're trying to think of, hey, there's a lot of items happening within the environment. We're being overwhelmed right now. I'm an individual with a backstory that's trying to celebrate Mario Day, and something is occurring within my environment. All right. The challenge that I see just off of that story is the manual processes. They can't keep up because for each incident, I have to go into CloudTrail and trying to figure out, maybe I'll use Athena to query the logs, things of that nature. But I posed a question to Javier in this context. So we have somebody overwhelmed. The manual process can't keep up. How many hours do you say somebody spends a day trying to handle security tasks manually? 4+ hours, 2 to 4, less than 2. What has your experience been?
I believe that was a question for me, right?
Yeah.
It really depends on the size of the company, how long they've been on AWS. I just had a case where a small company, but the amount of leadership for who owns the AWS account, so to speak, had changed quite a bit over 5 years. And in that process, knowing what is what or who is who with respect to IAM users was lost. So with that specific customer, I had to give them 24 hours to go through everything. And that wasn't even a one-person task. He had to bring in 4 other people. So it could take hours, right? It could take hours just going through and making the decision about what is needed and what's not.
Yeah, I think that's important concept, and getting everybody in the room, right? Because there's IR plans where it's like, okay, we're going to start up the phone bridge, and this person's going to join this person, and this team member, and in this time, who's actually going through, and one saying hello, but two also just doing the work. That's the hands-on keyboard actions. That also takes a step because sometimes there's toll gates to say, okay, before we remove this environment, before we do this, before we shut this down because it causes this, we have to get everybody to agree upon. And in this period of time, there can be a lot happening, as well as there's a lot happening in chat. So if we go through and start to think about what's going on, we go back to some of our early questions. DDoS attacks and mass report on social media. I've been trying to remove bloatwell. I think that goes to one of the biggest security concerns. And then we also have somebody saying bedrock. And then starting to go through enterprise support to understand best solution. We get a good woo in there and a good LOL. We always like to have those as we start to laugh. But as we start to understand and chat, I throw this question to you. How much time are you spending in all these different areas? And how do you go about it? How many hours? And I take that pause for a second to say hours because it's hours. But back to the side quest. I digress. So what is the solution to this? Because as SideQuest legend has it, there's something happening within the environment. Well, hey, maybe we have something for that. Maybe we have maybe two things or three or four. I lose track of how many automation services. But I think basic automation is the place to start. But I pose this question to our sensei today is, what was the first security task you automated?
It's a great question. So prior to joining force with Russ on the customer incident response team, I worked as a, I guess builder solutions architect is the best way to describe it. So on my last role, I would come in and work with customers that were looking to innovate in the cloud and build with CloudFormation. We use the Cloud Development Kit CDK, which is similar to Terraform, but it's more AWS specific. And we come up with new processes. So one of my favorite projects that I worked on was an attack surface enumeration tool with this customer. So portfolio acquisition company, as they kept acquiring new assets into their portfolio, people weren't reporting appropriately. It's a globally based firm. As that map expanded, they didn't have the right resources to properly know what they had. And before my team was engaged, their process was using a single EC2 instance and just running a bunch of scripts, and that would take a week. So they would be 1 week behind knowing what resources they had. So my team came in and I built this solution using step functions and coordinating Lambda functions and ECS tasks to do everything they did, to know what domains they have and what are possible typo squatted domains that might be fraudulently reaching out to their customers.
And I would say you achieved the customer outcome just off of leveraging all those different services in a manner that helped them reduce all those different items while trying to figure out other items that are occurring within the environment. So
Yep. So it went from a 1 week process to a 1 hour process.
Yeah. And I would say that would be a great story to tell, right? Especially when you're beginning automation of like, hey, this is what we did, right? This is what we achieved.
Yeah.
Because did it open any questions to what else can we automate within the environment? That would be the question that I think would be asked next, right? Of by any stakeholders where this used to take a week. What else takes a week, right?
Yeah.
Russ, did you ever experience other items like that of just automation and leveraging it? Or if you remember your first security automation?
Yes, actually, my first automation was basically a paging app, and so it just like texted me every time I got a ticket back in the SOC days. But yeah, so I mean, I've definitely have had my own security automation journey. I think it's definitely possible to kind of have those sorts of results that Javier's talking about, is significantly decreasing manual labor time. When you're looking at different metrics, because that's what the business cares about, is metrics. You really can show quite a significant amount of growth just with some basic automations. Like you said, looking at your things, I mean, like, hey, what takes a week? What is important? Have we run into any incidents recently that would have us rethinking our how we do things? And so yeah, it's definitely a lot that goes into it, and should really be a part of your threat modeling process. What are areas where we can afford to automate and not spend as much time in? What are other areas where we actually need our analysts and engineers to focus on? So it really is a part of priority setting as well. And so it's definitely an important piece, definitely.
Yeah.
And I love these comments, though.
Yeah. They're great, and they go along with the whole side quest that we're on, of just thinking about how to automate everything, right? Using tags, AWS organization, all great things. Lots of toys to play with, right? In terms of that, right? There's a double meaning in there. Affordable development cycle with security is top priority. Yes, we would agree with that as well. As practitioners of the automation ways, I was going to say energy, but I digress. When we start to think about the side quests, I know we didn't have the board, but we had the spirit of side quests right here in our hearts. But I think we need to zoom in and take a look at each other and say, security automation is important, and everybody should practice it, and everybody should know what this does within their environment and how to leverage that, right? And I also hold this up for Javier as well. Right. So as we start to go through and understand that is the core piece of side quests, but I think we also need to hit that pause button and take that step back out within the environment and start to delve in a little bit more to those items Javier was talking about when we mentioned Event Bridge and Lambda. Where do we go next? Where would we go, Sensei? We'll say that.
Yep. Happy to take the reins here. Are we ready to jump into the console?
Yes, ready as we're going to be.
Perfect. So if you don't mind bringing that up.
Yep.
All right. So everyone should see the screen. I've got a bunch of tabs open. We'll go through it pretty efficiently here. So pretty much I've created an example here where we have an RDS secret stored in secrets manager. And our situation here is a bad actor is going to go in and try to delete the secret policy in an attempt to be able to retrieve the secret, right? So what we're looking for here, we have our secret set on the left side. Deleting that secret policy is going to create a CloudTrail event. And because I've already pre-configured an event bridge rule, it's looking for that CloudTrail event of delete secret policy before it kicks off a Lambda function. Now, what this Lambda function will do is it'll take a containment policy that we've created, or that I've created in the past, and it's going to attach that policy to that secret while also rotating the secret, right? Because in real time, or in the real world, before security automations, what would happen is we'd see this log and we'd be like, huh, let me look into this. That's already too long. In this type of environment, we want to be able to move quickly. And in a lot of situations where we see that there's some kind of identity and access management compromise, it stems from this. Something little like this which then can escalate, and then snowball down. And so if we can come up with these little automations here and there, we can try to take some bite out of these events. So what I do want to do, I do want to take a step back. We talked about CLI earlier. For those that are not familiar, we can use the console, the terminal. Right now I have a shell in the terminal to interact with our resources, right? So there's an AWS CLI. We can run AWS help, right? This will essentially, like all CLI tools, just give us some explanations of what we're using. But just every Amazonian's favorite example, right? Let's list our buckets. AWS S3LS, right? That's the one bucket I have in this account. And if I were to go and select S3, jump into S3, I then have to make sure I'm in the right view and scroll down, right? This takes more time. Like, even though it might feel like it's just a couple seconds, tack that on, and it takes more time. So that's me interacting with the terminal. But if I want to take it a step further and use something like a Lambda function, I can use SDK. So in this Lambda function, we have an example here. So going back into that architecture diagram, so this Lambda function that we're looking at, that will change the policy added to that secret and also rotate it, is what we're going to look at right here. So hopefully everyone likes Python. This is written in Python. Sorry if you're a JavaScript aficionado. So here, what we're doing is we're using the Boto3 library, which is the SDK for Python. I don't know why it's called Boto3. I know that there's a story behind that, but I don't remember the story, so apologies here. But what we're doing is we're creating clients for the services, right? We have one for Secrets Manager. We have another for Identity and Access Management. We're setting the secret name. And for those that are really familiar with ARNs, these are incorrect ARNs because I've taken out the account numbers here. But I have not deployed this code, so it will run. Anyways, so we set the ARN for our secret, and essentially what we're looking for is when this event happens, we are parsing through. We're going to parse through the event to look for the secret ID, right? So we're going to get a big JSON object, and we'll parse it through based on the detail, the request parameters, and we'll be able to see which resources are impacted. So for those that are familiar using CloudTrail, it's a similar process to identify, like, if someone were to create a user, right? You go into the details, you look in the request parameters, and you can see the user that's created if it was created with no error. So once we have that secret ID, we're then able to review which IAM user was involved, and we can attach a new role policy. And so the role policy that we're attaching is just a deny policy. So we're starting with, if there's no access denied, then we're jumping here. So if it's not an access denied, we find out which secret is impacted, we find out which user or which role is impacted, and then we attach a policy. And then at the same time, what we're also going to do is we're going to rotate the secret. Now, this is essentially 10 lines of code. That would be many, many more clicks. And this would run significantly quicker than if I were to go and click away at everything. So what I'd like to do, jump into Event Bridge really quick, just so we can look at the rule details. It should be this one. Yep. So as we can see here, we're setting our source to Secrets Manager. This is just a regular API call via CloudTrail. And we're looking for one specific event, the delete resource policy. Now, if we wanted it to look for every event, right, sometimes what you'll see is you'll see a star. But for the context of this event or this rule that we're creating, it doesn't make sense to do a star. We only want this one specific event. So jumping in to the secret, we have a resource policy here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this resource permission save, and what should happen is that the Lambda function will then run very quickly. So looking back at the architecture, right, we have the event bridge rule, we have our secret ready. We're going to go ahead and delete that secret policy. So if I come in here, edit permissions, Command A, and I save it, what we should see, so this account doesn't have CloudTrail. Yeah, that would be a problem if it was not the actual version of Python. Thankfully, we're using the actual Bodo 3. What we should see here is that it'll take a couple seconds. Unfortunately, I don't have CloudTrail enabled in this account, so I can't show you the events as they populate. But if I refresh the page, resource policy updates. This deny was not there before. So if we look at Lambda in a moment, we'll see that the Lambda function ran. So if I went to go click retrieve secret value, failed to get the secret value. So in real time, what that would look like is if there was an access key exposed and someone were to try to delete or update that policy to get that access key in real time or near real time, let's say, because sometimes there's some milliseconds in between, it'll attach that policy and prevent what could have been an event with unauthorized data access. So if we look at this Lambda function, let me get out of full screen here. We go to monitor, right? Sometimes this monitor is a little behind. But because we know it ran because this policy was not here before.
And that's interesting sometimes that if you're looking at the automation speed itself, it's already been remediated before the console itself took to say, hey, it's been auto-remediated. And I think that's one of the areas of your demo when you're starting to get to that place of going through the console and clicking around and doing these other items. There's a human factor in that of just remembering where to click, like you were mentioning. And then 2, figuring out what's going on, and then remediation, where that happened within a couple of seconds of what you were going through, right? And I also wanted to take a quick pause because this comment's been here for a while. Do you have experience with airport automation security system? How do you access it remotely when the customer is denied to you VPN access? So I would take the step back of when it comes to remotely accessing different items within your own organization, your environment, you would implement different services. You could look at Amazon verified access, for example, right? Depending on who as a user needs to access something, setting up these different services will give you another alternative to VPN access in your environment. And then you could get into private link if it's between different areas. The other place I would say is VPC endpoints. What are you accessing? Then there's Cognito. What type of services? So there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. Right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as Amazonians, what are we always going to say? Let's work backwards, right? Why do we need to access remotely?
Yeah, exactly. And then going from that, having automations in place, just in case something were to go in, happen and something gets deleted. Does it automatically trigger a deny within the environment? Does it alert the correct personnel? Does it have an automation workflow to maybe deny and then trigger something in, let's say, a message form to Slack or something along those lines to say, hey, this happened in the environment, it's already been taken care of, and it notifies the correct administrators. So
yeah. And actually, I'd love to take a second and step back here. I saw that there was a comment about legal and security automations. I think that what I'd like to share next kind of answers that, but also kind of doesn't. So for those that work in compliance, we do have other tools called config that are compliance monitoring tools, I like to explain them as. So essentially what they're looking for is similar to Event Bridge when it comes to an event-driven architecture, but it's more along the side of configuration changes. So in this account, actually, I haven't done it this way before, but let's see if it'll work this way. So typically what I'll do is I'll share the configuration change, and then I'll jump into the event bridge and put a deny everything. I haven't done the deny everything and then do the configuration change. So let's see if it'll actually let me do it. But with config, right, what we're doing is we're looking to make sure that our resources are configured a certain way. So this secret, for example, is non-compliant because it doesn't have automatic rotation, right? Which for folks that are compliance specialists, you know, we want to make sure that everything is how it has to be. So if I were to go into the secret and then configure rotation, oh, actually, sorry about that. The automation does also include turning on rotation. So it already did it for me. So what we should have seen in this config rule was that it was not compliant. We saw it was not compliant. And now we see that it's compliant because the Lambda function turned it on for us. You see, that's the beauty of automations. I didn't even have to do that myself. That was not planned. I set it up that way.
And deny everything to the comment Dragonoff will say.
Yeah, right.
Automatically deny it and then figure it out. So yeah, I think you demonstrated a couple different points that are really important when it comes to automation. And it's not just, okay, it makes my life easier. It makes your life easier, plus it's faster, plus it saves you time, plus it gives you more insight into what's going on, because you free yourself up in order to do, let's say, the higher items of what's happening, right? To communicate to the stakeholders and think about, okay, this attack vector was exploited. How can we better prepare in the future? So it takes you through the first couple of steps of, you know, the incident response lifecycle, and you get to the part where it's like, okay, how do we fix this? Right. So I think that's an important part to consider as well. So,
and it leaves a paper trail. So for those that need the receipts, they're there.
Yeah. It also gives you a level of fine tuning or fine control over what occurs in your account, which is obviously quite nice. But
because then going back to the receipts is, okay, what spun up within the environment? How long was it on? And how much did that cost? That's the important part to consider, because sometimes it's those little items. Because the other opposite could be true. It could be an individual who's authorized that is doing this work, and then maybe they put a B where a C should be, and then something happens within the environment. I think that's important to consider. Is there's a factor of human error that could occur through the normal, you know, workday, and having automations in place to kind of shut down and deny and take that step back for the individual greatly helps, especially when it comes to cost prevention and optimization and all that good stuff.
That's a great point, because it does also help protect with non-malicious, you know, because there's a level of incidental outages or you know, actions that you would prefer not happened. And so that does, you know, give you that level of control to say, hey, we don't want these changes made. And if they are made, we can quickly revert that back to the settings that we would like in our account. So it's a nice little piece of tuning as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the next place to go, and thank you, Javier, for walking us through those different areas. I think the next piece that we need to talk about is kind of getting to the understanding of, all right, I know I have to do automation, but the key part is, how do I continue on this path of learning? How do I raise my security automation power level to something that is over 9,000? And I would yell, but it's too early in the afternoon for that. So when we start to think about this, we start to go down the knowledge quest route. And the knowledge quest route is tiered, right? We have our 100, 200, 300. So starting out from, let's say, a turtle school trainee, all right, we're just individual, right? Shout out to the turtles. As we're starting to go through that, what do we have to consider? Well, I think one of the parts to consider is working backwards, like we were saying. And what do we mean by working backwards? Is maybe we start from the incident response side and start to read through the incident response white paper, right? Start to go through and understand, hey, maybe we have to kind of level up our understanding of what is AWS security incident response? What are the concepts that I need to know? Terminology is a big thing, right? But when you're starting out at anything, you need to know kind of the ones and zeros, as I say. What does everything break down to? What is the scope? What is analysis? How do we go about this? And tagging AWS resources. I think that's an important part. Have either of you tagged something that maybe been malicious in your span of AWS lifetime? I'll put that question to you, Javier or Russ. Have you ever tagged anything?
Depends on how we define tags.
Yeah,
I've done some tagging, mostly because of CloudFormation and the automatic tagging that comes from there. But yes, definitely have experience with tagging.
Yeah, I don't think I've tagged anything malicious though, but yeah.
So we're clear. So we're all clear. Okay, good. Trailer receipts into the cloud. And event-driven automation architecture that reduces human error, improves efficiency. Exactly right.
Nailed it.
And then when you start to go through the different pieces, we will figure out how maybe we can do this as a LinkedIn post, that architecture, Javier, that we were showing. That might be an interesting item just from a diagram standpoint. That could be a follow-up.
Absolutely.
PRFAQ is also very helpful. And tags, huge. See, the tags were so huge that an exclamation mark couldn't be formed in that sentence because it's so important. But now that we're a trainee, what if we were to take it up a level? If we were to take it one step beyond to being a super security automator? That is a good question. How do we do that? Well, maybe we start to experiment a little bit more of understanding, hey, maybe we have to go and do some skills building of the variety. And there's a skill builder that is centered around updating security groups automatically using AWS Lambda. And I just show the skill builder site. We'll have the links that you can follow up with and do the homework on a little bit later. But essentially, there's a lot of free trainings out there that you could go through, dive into, and understand. So once you have that skill and completed it, feel free, tag us. Let us know that you went down that path of understanding. And I would say it's a guided path. If you want a little bit of the next level included, I think if after super, I think it's ultra, right? How do we go ultra instinct automator? How do we level it up and take it one step further? How do we react without knowing that we reacted? If that makes sense. Right? So I think the step is to do some more training, some more workshops. And that's where our next piece goes into play of going down the workshop route. And one workshop that I think is interesting is operational excellence through automated trusted advisor remediations. Yes, it's a mouthful to say, but there's also a big amount of lessons to learn. So when you start to delve into this, you start to understand, hey, what are the different pieces that they're talking about? Well, if we go to the actual solution architecture, you start to look at, hey, what are some of the remediation triggers? And by going down these different checklist items, you start to go down a path that Javier went. It's like, okay, I have an outcome that I'm trying to achieve and work backwards from. How do I leverage Lambda? How do I use Systems Manager? How do I use Trusted Advisor to see something's going on in my account? And when you start to think about that, you start to piece all these different items together. And I think this is where the Ultra Instinct comes into play, because you start to think about your environment in a different way of how can I make this more efficient in a secure manner? And what pieces do I need in there? Then I would also ask, if we are thinking of Ultra Instinct automation, Russ or Javier, what do you think of? What pops into your mind when it comes to this?
Ultra Instinct? Oof.
Yes.
I think that What's that?
No, just throw out the step functions. And, no.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, actually, that's a good point. But yeah, going through step functions and going through the different like IAM automations, say for like implementing new policies and going in things like Access Advisor and your IAM Access Analyzer, use stuff like that. Or that's what I think of.
Yeah, it's important. And Lewis also, automation is a game changer for modern cloud security. I would agree with that. It is a game changer. It also tends to save a lot of time. So it's a great point there, Lewis. Thank you. Yep. Freeze up your repetitive work. Automate the other stuff so you can focus on the higher stuff. And hello. And Joseph, hello. Right? So interesting items. But Javier, Ultra Instinct. We have a couple minutes left. So go.
There was a spoiler. I was going to jump into step functions, right? We have different automations. How can we put them all together so that they run themselves, so to speak? That's really going to be the game changers. We have automations for a couple tasks. How can we correlate them together? How can we get them to run together? Which pulling in step functions this late into this conversation is not setting us up for success here. But using some kind of orchestration, right? You can use Lambda. The problem with Lambda is that it can only run for 15 minutes each execution. So if you have a task that runs more than 15 minutes, well, what are you going to do in place of that? Figuring out how these things go together and work that way so that these repetitive tasks are completely prone from human error, right? Because we're automating them as to the best of our ability.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. Is we went through the beginning, the basic steps of learning how to control our energy, how to fly, right? Leveraging something like Event Bridge, and how do we start to remediate these actions and kind of power up with Lambda. But to take it one step further, like you mentioned, I think step functions is an important part that we do not have time for, but it's also a good cliffhanger to leave off on, because next week we're going to dive a little bit deeper to understand, hey, how can we level up a little bit more? How can we power up? How can somebody, when they look at our environment, say their power level is over 9,000 when it comes to security automation? But in the meantime, I want to take the step back and thank Javier, our training sensei for today, to kick us off on this route.
Thanks for having me. Always happy to join.
Yeah. And you're always welcome to come back, because we like to have fun here. It's at the Safe Room featuring Security SideQuest, because every step helps you to level up by building that one XP point that eventually levels you up from your environment standpoint, your mindset standpoint, and overall, I would say your happiness standpoint, because then you don't have to manually do everything. So
that's right.
So, and Russ, I know you always like to close out with something. It's a very important item. And what is that, Russ?
Yes, please create an incident response plan.
See? Exactly. So make sure that you do that. I wouldn't say on your free time. I would say at the right time, which is now. So thank you, everybody, for joining in and leveling up. And we will see you next week. So till then, cheers and happy Mario Day while you're at it. So take care.
Thanks, everyone.